The billionaire CEO was born blind until his maid did the impossible. He built an empire without ever seeing a single sunrise. Every sound, every word, his entire world lived in darkness. But when a new maid walks into his life, everything changes. Her voice stirs something deep inside him, something he's never felt before. Then one night, during a storm, she sings an old hymn, and the unthinkable happens. He opens his eyes, and for the first time, he sees. But miracles come with a price. The world calls him crazy. His own company turns against him, and when the maid who changed his life suddenly disappears, was it truly a miracle, or something far greater than sight? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, warming the polished hardwood floors beneath Jace Grayson's bare feet. He didn't need sight to navigate his home. 52 years of darkness had taught him to map his world through touch, sound, and memory. Each step was measured, precise, like the carefully controlled empire he'd built. His fingers trailed along the smooth wall as he made his way to the kitchen. The cool marble counter felt familiar under his hands. 15 steps from his bedroom, turn right at the slight chip in the baseboard, then 12 more steps to the coffee maker. The routine was as much a part of him as breathing. "Good morning, Mr. Grayson," his assistant called from the entrance, her heels clicking against the floor in a rhythm he knew well. "Your suit for today's board meeting is pressed and ready. The blue pinstripe, I assume?" Jace's voice carried the authority of a man who commanded a billion-dollar technology company. "The one with the silk lining?" "Yes, sir, and your car will be ready in 45 minutes. Jace nodded, his fingers finding the coffee cup she'd placed before him. The ceramic was warm against his palms, the aroma rich and familiar. Everything in his world was ordered, controlled, predictable, just the way he needed it to be. The morning progressed like any other. Board meetings at Grayson Innovations headquarters filled his calendar, discussions about market expansion, new patents, future technologies. His blindness had never been a limitation in the boardroom. If anything, it had sharpened his other senses, made him more attuned to the subtle shifts in people's voices, the hidden meanings behind their words. But it was the afternoon that brought the first crack in his perfectly ordered world. "Mr. Grayson." Mrs. Dunley's voice was softer than usual as she approached him in his home office. He'd known her for decades, could read the tension in her tone like Braille. "What is it?" He turned away from his computer, where he'd been reviewing reports through his text-to-speech software. "I need to speak with you about something. Important." The slight tremor in her voice made his stomach tighten. Mrs. Dunley, who had been a constant presence in his life since his mother's passing, who knew exactly how he liked his shirts folded and his meals prepared, who had been the closest thing to family he'd had for years. "George, my husband. His health has taken a turn." Her voice cracked slightly. "I need to retire, Mr. Grayson, to take care of him full-time." The words hit him like a physical blow. Jace's fingers gripped the arms of his leather chair, his knuckles whitening. "I see," he said, though in truth he felt suddenly lost, like a ship cut loose from its anchor. "I've given it a lot of thought." Mrs. Dunley continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I wouldn't leave if it wasn't absolutely necessary. You know that." Jace stood, his movement stiff, mechanical. "Of course. George needs you." The words felt hollow in his mouth. "When?" "End of the week," she said softly. "I've already helped arrange for a replacement. That won't be necessary." He cut her off, his tone sharp. "I'm perfectly capable of managing on my own." "Mr. Grayson, Jace," she said, using his first name as only she dared to do. "You need someone here. The house is too big to maintain alone, and you—" "I said it won't be necessary." His voice was steel now, unyielding. "Thank you for your years of service, Mrs. Dunley. I'll have accounting prepare your retirement package." He heard her sigh, a sound heavy with both sadness and resignation. "Very well, sir. I'll finish out the week." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls, but Jace's mind kept returning to the impending void in his life. Mrs. Dunley had been more than just a housekeeper. She'd been his connection to the world outside his carefully constructed walls, a link to his past, to memories of his mother. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Jace found himself drawn to the grand piano in his living room. His fingers ghosted over the keys, remembering. His mother had taught him to play, guiding his small hands over the ivory, teaching him to hear the music in his heart since he couldn't see it on the page. The first notes of her favorite lullaby filled the empty space. Jace played from memory, each note perfect, each chord precise. But tonight the music felt different, hollower somehow, as if it too knew that another piece of his past was slipping away. His phone buzzed, interrupting the melancholy melody. "Mr. Grayson." His assistant's voice came through the speaker. "I've arranged for the new housekeeper to start tomorrow morning. She comes highly recommended. Cancel it." He interrupted, his fingers still resting on the piano keys. "I don't need anyone else in this house. Sir, with all due respect, you can't manage everything alone. Mrs. Dunley is irreplaceable," he said firmly. "I don't need company. I need efficiency. I need control. What I don't need is someone else trying to fill a role they can't possibly understand." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "The new housekeeper will arrive at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning," his assistant said finally, her tone professional but firm. "Good night, Mr. Grayson." The line went dead before he could protest further. Jace sat in the darkness he'd known all his life, his hand still resting on the piano keys. The silence of the penthouse pressed in around him, heavy and absolute. Tomorrow would bring change, and Jace Grayson hated change. Change meant uncertainty, and uncertainty meant loss of control. He played one final chord, letting it ring out into the empty room. The sound faded slowly, like Mrs. Dunley's footsteps walking away from his office that afternoon, like the last echoes of his mother's voice in his memories, like everything else that had ever mattered in his life. Tomorrow would come, whether he wanted it to or not. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of his home, Jace allowed himself to feel the weight of loneliness he usually kept locked away behind his walls of control and precision. Tomorrow, he would be the commanding CEO again, the brilliant mind behind Grayson Innovations. But tonight, he was just a man, sitting at his mother's piano, playing to an empty room. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, creating patterns Jace Grayson couldn't see but could feel on his skin. He stood in his office, fingers drumming against his mahogany desk as he waited. The clock chimed 8 o'clock, and right on cue, the elevator dinged. 2 sets of footsteps entered, one measured and professional, the other lighter, almost skipping. Jace's jaw tightened. A child. His assistant hadn't mentioned that detail. "Good morning, Mr. Grayson." A warm, melodious voice greeted him. "I'm Lila Thompson, your new housekeeper." "And I'm Hope," a bright young voice chimed in. "I'm 10 years old and—" "Hope," Lila gently interrupted. "Remember what we discussed about being professional?" Jace could hear the rustle of movement, probably the child fidgeting. His fingers pressed harder against the desk. "Mrs. Thompson, Ms." Lila corrected softly. "Ms. Thompson," he amended, his tone clipped. "I wasn't informed you'd be bringing a child to work." "I apologize for any inconvenience," Lila replied, her voice maintaining its professional warmth despite the tension. "My daughter comes with me during school breaks. She's very well behaved and brings her books to study. This is a place of business, not a daycare center." Jace cut in. He moved around his desk, his movements precise and practiced. "I expect complete professionalism and minimal disruption. Keep her out of my way." There was a brief silence, heavy with hurt, but when Lila spoke again, her voice remained steady. "Of course, Mr. Grayson. You won't even know she's here." Throughout the morning, Jace tried to focus on his work, but new sounds kept drawing his attention. The gentle swish of Lila's cleaning cloth against surfaces, her soft footsteps as she moved from room to room, and occasionally the whisper of turning pages from wherever Hope had settled with her books. But it was the humming that truly disrupted his concentration. As Lila worked, she hummed hymns, old ones that tickled at the edges of Jace's memory. Her voice was rich and soulful, filling the usually silent spaces of his home with unexpected warmth. He found himself pausing in his work, listening despite himself to the familiar melodies of "Amazing Grace" and "How Great Thou Art." The morning stretched into afternoon, and Jace maintained his distance, working in his office while life moved around him in the penthouse. But fate had other plans. As he stepped out to retrieve a document from the printer, a small body collided with his legs. "Oh!" Hope gasped, and he heard the thud of books hitting the carpet. "I'm so sorry. I was reading while walking. Mum always says I shouldn't do that, but the story was so exciting and—" "What did your mother say about staying out of my way?" Jace's voice was stern, but something in the girl's genuine remorse made it softer than he intended. "I really am sorry," Hope said, and he could hear her gathering her fallen books. "I'm Hope. Hope who likes reading out loud. That's what everyone calls me at the library because I help with story time for the little kids." Before Jace could respond, Lila's footsteps approached quickly. "Hope Thompson, what did we discuss about being careful in Mr. Grayson's home?" "It's fine," Jace found himself saying, surprising even himself. "No harm done." He turned away quickly, retreating to his office before the warmth in Hope's voice could crack his carefully maintained walls any further. Evening settled over the penthouse, and Jace sat at his desk, pretending to work while actually listening to the sounds of life from the servants' quarters. The dinner hour had passed, and he'd heard Lila and Hope's quiet conversation as they prepared their meal in the small kitchen allocated to staff. Now, as night descended, their voices drifted to him again, soft but clear in the quiet building. They were praying. "Dear God," Hope's young voice began, "thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you for the man who gave us work when we needed it most. And Lord," Lila's voice joined in, gentle and sincere, "please bless Mr. Grayson. Fill this home with your love and light." Jace sat frozen in his chair, an unfamiliar feeling settling in his chest. Guilt. When was the last time anyone had prayed for him? Had anyone ever? The genuine gratitude in their voices pierced through his defenses, making him uncomfortably aware of his earlier harshness. He remained at his desk long after their voices fell silent, their evening prayers giving way to the soft sounds of preparation for sleep. The penthouse felt different somehow, as if Lila's hymns had left echoes in the walls, as if Hope's bright energy had scattered something warm and alive through the sterile spaces. Later, lying in his bed, Jace found himself straining to hear any sound from the servants' quarters. Faintly, so faint he might have imagined it, he caught Lila's voice singing what sounded like a lullaby. The sound was soft as light itself, gentle as a mother's touch, and it stirred memories he'd thought long buried. Memories of his own mother's voice, of comfort, of a time before he'd built his walls so high. He lay awake, listening to that distant song, feeling the first cracks forming in the fortress he'd built around his heart. The guilt lingered, but alongside it was something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. The days that followed brought a gentle rhythm to the penthouse. Lila moved through the spaces with quiet efficiency, learning the invisible map of Jace's carefully ordered world. She noticed how he traced his fingers along the wall at exactly shoulder height when walking to his office, how he counted steps between rooms, how he knew his location by the subtle changes in the flooring beneath his feet. By the third morning, Lila had memorized his schedule down to the minute. At precisely 7 o'clock, she placed his coffee on the kitchen counter, 2 sugars, no cream, just as his bedroom door opened. The cup would always be positioned with the handle turned exactly 45 degrees to the right, where his hand would find it without searching. "Good morning, Mr. Grayson," she would say, her voice warm but professional. He would nod, sometimes managing a quiet "morning" in return, and she would step back, giving him space to move through his routine undisturbed. In his office, she learned to dust around his precisely arranged items without moving them a millimeter. His laptop remained centered on the desk, his phone exactly 3 inches to the right, his braille reader positioned at the perfect angle for his hands to find it naturally. But it was Hope who brought the first real change to the penthouse's rigid patterns. One morning, as Jace reached for his coffee cup, his fingers brushed against something unexpected. A small piece of paper, thick with raised dots. He traced them slowly, reading the simple message. "Good morning, Mr. Bright." His brow furrowed. "Mrs. Thompson?" Lila looked up from where she was arranging fresh fruit on a plate. "Yes, Mr. Grayson." "What is this?" He held up the note, his voice tight with suspicion. "Ah," Lila said softly. "That would be from Hope. She's been taking online braille lessons for the past week. She wanted to... Well, she said she wanted to talk to you in your language." Jace stood perfectly still, the note trembling slightly in his hand. "In my language?" "Yes, sir. She spent 3 hours practicing just that simple message. She was worried about getting the dots wrong." Lila paused, then added gently, "She's not mocking you, Mr. Grayson. Hope doesn't have a mocking bone in her body." Jace carefully set the note down beside his coffee cup, his fingers lingering on the raised dots. "I see," he said quietly, though his throat felt oddly tight. The next morning, another note appeared. "Today will be a good day." The dots were more confident this time, more evenly spaced. Jace found himself running his fingers over them repeatedly throughout breakfast, reading the simple message again and again. Hope's notes became a daily occurrence. Some days they were simple greetings, other days they were observations about the weather or tiny facts she'd learned at school. Each one was carefully crafted, the braille precise and clear, showing hours of practice and dedication. One evening, after a particularly long board meeting, Jace found himself touching one of the notes Hope had left that morning. "Sunshine feels like warm hugs," it read. Something in his chest ached, a feeling he couldn't quite name. He sat at his desk, running his fingers over the dots until they barely made sense anymore, lost in memories of another pair of hands that had once learned braille just for him. His mother's hands, so many years ago. Later that night, as was his custom, Jace made his way to the piano. The penthouse was quiet, the day's work done. His fingers found the keys, and he began to play. Not the usual technical exercises, but something softer, more melodic. A piece his mother had taught him when he was young. He didn't hear Hope approach, but somewhere in the middle of the second movement, he caught the sound of quiet breathing in the hallway outside. Then, ever so faintly, a gentle humming joined his melody. The sound was pure and sweet, perfectly in tune, following his music like a shadow follows light. For the first time in years, Jace didn't stop playing when he realized he had an audience. Instead, he let the music flow, filling the hallways with sound, while Hope's quiet humming wove through the notes like golden thread through fabric. The days began to take on a different quality. Mornings, once dreaded for their emptiness, now held the promise of Hope's notes. The strict routines remained, but they felt less like walls and more like familiar paths. Even the silence felt different, warmer somehow, alive with possibility. Lila noticed the change in him, subtle though it was. His good mornings came more readily, his shoulders carried less tension, and occasionally, very occasionally, something almost like a smile would touch his lips as his fingers found the daily Braille message beside his coffee cup. One morning, as he traced the dots of Hope's latest note, "Birds are singing extra happy today," Jace realized he had begun to look forward to these moments. The simple messages, the sound of Hope's humming in the hallway, even Lila's quiet presence as she moved through his carefully ordered world. They had become bright points in his day, like stars in what had once been an endless night. The piano music changed too. Where once he had played only structured exercises and complex classical pieces, now simpler melodies found their way into his evening practice. Songs that invited humming, songs that spoke of warmth and light and hope. And each night, as his music filled the penthouse, he would hear the soft footsteps in the hallway, the gentle breathing, the sweet, clear humming that joined his melodies without hesitation or fear. Time passed gently in the penthouse, marked not by meetings and deadlines, but by Braille notes and piano music, by Hope's quiet presence and Lila's steady kindness. And though Jace couldn't see the physical changes in his home, he could feel them, in the way the air moved differently, in the way sounds echoed more softly, in the way morning light seemed to carry warmth he hadn't noticed before. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Jace Grayson began to look forward to mornings. Not for the work they brought, or the challenges they presented, but for the simple joy of reaching out and finding a new message waiting beside his coffee cup, written in dots that spoke of caring, of effort, of connection. Written in a language that bridged the darkness between his world and the light that Hope and Lila had brought into it. Dark clouds gathered over the city that afternoon, turning the usual bustle of traffic below into muffled whispers. Inside the penthouse, Jace sat at his desk, his fingers moving across financial reports in Braille, while the first rumbles of thunder rolled in the distance. The storm approached slowly, like a giant padding on heavy feet. Each thunderclap grew louder, rattling the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. Jace could feel the vibrations through his chair, through the soles of his feet. The air pressure changed, making his ears pop, and the familiar sounds of his home took on strange, hollow qualities. Lightning crackled across the sky, and suddenly the power flickered. The gentle hum of electronics that usually filled the penthouse, the sound Jace used to orient himself, stuttered and died. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the growl of thunder and the steady drum of rain against glass. Jace's hands stilled on his desk. Without the usual background noise, the space felt vast and unfamiliar. His heart rate picked up slightly. Not fear exactly, but discomfort. He had built his world on sound and routine, and now both were disrupted. Soft footsteps approached his office, Lila's steady, measured pace. She knocked gently on the doorframe. "Mr. Grayson, I've brought you some tea." The scent of chamomile reached him, along with something else, the warm, waxy smell of candles. He could hear the tiny flames flickering, creating pockets of warmth in the darkness he always lived in. "Thank you, Lila," he said, his voice slightly tighter than usual. "How bad is the storm?" "It's quite a show out there," she replied, moving carefully through the room. The china clinked softly as she set the tea service down. "The whole city's lit up with lightning, but we're safe up here." She must have noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the edge of his desk. In the candlelit darkness, she began to hum softly, the sound barely audible above the storm. Then, quietly, she began to sing. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The melody was different from the usual hymnal version, slower, gentler, with subtle variations that transformed it into something closer to a lullaby. Jace's breath caught in his throat. His mother had sung it exactly the same way. Memories crashed over him like waves. Suddenly he was 5 years old again, curled in his mother's lap during a thunderstorm much like this one. Her perfume, jasmine and vanilla, surrounded him as she sang, her chest vibrating against his ear. Her hands, soft and warm, guided his small fingers across piano keys, teaching him to play by feel rather than sight. The scent memory was so strong he could almost taste it. His mother's voice and Lila's merged in his mind, creating a harmony across decades. His hands began to tremble. That saved a wretch like me. Lila's voice continued, rich and warm in the storm-dark room. Each note seemed to pierce straight through Jace's carefully constructed walls, finding the lonely child he'd buried so deep inside himself. Tears burned behind his unseeing eyes. I once was lost, but now am found. She finished the verse and let the last note fade into the sound of rain. Will you be all right, Mr. Grayson? She asked softly. He couldn't speak. He managed a short nod, turning his face away to hide the emotion he knew must be visible there. Call if you need anything, she said, and he heard her step quietly from the room, leaving behind the candles and the ghost of her song. Jace sat trembling in his chair, his tea growing cold beside him. The storm raged on outside, but he barely heard it. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, tangled with Lila's, both singing that ancient melody of grace and transformation. How many years had it been since he'd allowed himself to remember his mother's voice so clearly? How long since he'd let himself feel the depth of that loss? Lightning flashed again, closer now, and something extraordinary happened. Behind his unseeing eyes, where there had only ever been darkness, Jace saw something impossible. A faint glimmer of light, like a star glimpsed through clouds. He gasped, his hand flying to his face. Another flash, and there it was again. The briefest sensation of brightness, a dancing pattern of light and shadow. It lasted only a fraction of a second, but it was real. For the first time in his 52 years of life, Jace Grayson had seen light. He sat perfectly still, his heart pounding, waiting for the next flash. Each time lightning split the sky, the same miracle occurred. Tiny bursts of illumination in his eternal darkness, tears rolled down his cheeks, but he barely noticed them. The storm slowly moved across the city, but Jace remained awake all night, counting lightning flashes, treasuring each glimpse of light like a precious gift. As the thunder grew distant and the rain gentled to a soft patter, he wondered if he had imagined it all, the light, the memories, the way Lila's voice had opened something long sealed inside him. The candles burned low, their flames dancing unseen. Outside, the sky began to lighten toward dawn, though Jace couldn't see it. But something had changed in the darkness of the storm-swept night. Something had awakened that couldn't be put back to sleep. He touched his fingers to the window glass, feeling the last vibrations of distant thunder. Somewhere in the pre-dawn quiet, he heard hope stir in the servants' quarters, heard Lila's soft voice murmuring morning prayers. The familiar sounds anchored him, even as his world shifted beneath his feet. Morning light streamed through the penthouse windows, and for the first time in his life, Jace Grayson could sense it. Not see it exactly, but feel its presence like a warm hand hovering near his face. He stood perfectly still by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his heart racing as he tried to process this impossible change. "Dr. Matthews, I need you to come immediately," he said into his phone, his voice trembling slightly. "Something's different." While waiting for his doctor, Jace paced his office, passing through patches of what he could only describe as brightness. Each time he encountered one, he stopped, letting the strange new sensation wash over him. He heard Lila moving quietly through the house, preparing breakfast, and remembered her song from the night before. Dr. Matthews arrived within the hour, his familiar footsteps hurrying down the hallway. "Jace, what's going on?" "I can sense light," Jace said without preamble. "Since last night. During the storm I saw flashes when lightning struck. And now I can tell where the windows are. There's brightness." The doctor's sharp intake of breath was audible. "That's impossible with your condition. You have no functioning optic nerves." "Test me," Jace insisted. "I'm not imagining this." For the next hour, Dr. Matthews ran through a series of thorough examinations. He shined lights in Jace's eyes, moved objects through his field of vision, and documented every response. His voice grew increasingly amazed. "This is unprecedented," he finally said. "You're showing partial light perception. I can't explain it medically, but you're definitely responding to light stimuli. When did this start, exactly?" Jace swallowed hard. "Last night, during the storm, after—" He paused, feeling foolish. "After my housekeeper sang a hymn, the same one my mother used to sing." From the doorway came a small gasp. Lila stood there, a breakfast tray in her hands. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said softly. "I didn't mean to overhear." "Mrs. Thompson," Jace said, turning toward her voice. "The song you sang, something happened." He could hear her setting down the tray with trembling hands. "Mr. Grayson, it wasn't me. If something miraculous happened, it was God's doing, not mine. I'm just a housekeeper who likes to sing old hymns." The humility in her voice touched something in Jace's chest. Dr. Matthews cleared his throat. "Well, whatever the cause, this is remarkable. I'd like to schedule more tests, document everything properly." "Of course," Jace agreed. "But please keep this quiet for now. I need time to understand what's happening." Despite his request, word spread through his staff like wildfire. By afternoon, Jace could sense the changed atmosphere in his home. Whispered conversations, awed glances he couldn't see but could feel. His assistant, Thomas, hovered anxiously nearby, reorganizing his schedule to accommodate doctor's appointments. As evening approached, Jace found himself standing in his kitchen, drawn by the smell of Lila's cooking. He could sense the warm light from the overhead fixtures, like a gentle pressure on his face. "Mrs. Thompson?" he called out. "Yes, Mr. Grayson?" Her voice came from near the stove. "Aye." He cleared his throat. "Would you and Hope join me for dinner? At the main table?" The silence that followed felt weighted with surprise. "That's very kind of you, sir." "It's not kindness," he said quickly. I'd like the company." Soon they were seated around his formal dining table, a space that hadn't heard conversation in years. Hope's excitement was palpable as she carefully explained to Jace where everything was on his plate, using clock positions as reference points. "The potatoes are at 6 o'clock, she said seriously. "And the green beans are at 9 o'clock. Mama made her special meatloaf. That's right in the middle at 12 o'clock. Jace found himself smiling. "Thank you, Hope. That's very helpful. Can you really see light now?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. "Hope," Lila admonished gently, but Jace shook his head. "It's all right," he said. "Yes, I can sense brightness. It's very strange and new." "Like when you close your eyes and face the sun?" Hope asked. I don't know, Jace admitted. I've never experienced that before. A small hand touched his arm. I'll help you learn, Hope said simply. For the first time in longer than he could remember, laughter filled the dining room. They talked about Hope's school, about Lila's cooking, about the storm the night before. Jace found himself relaxing, letting down guards he hadn't even realized he maintained. Then his phone rang. Mr. Grayson. Thomas's voice was tense. The board is calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. They've received reports about changes in your medical condition. There are concerns about your fitness to lead the company. The warmth of the evening frosted over. Who told them? I'm not sure, sir, but they're questioning whether these reported visions might indicate psychological instability. Jace's hand tightened on the phone. I'll handle it. After hanging up, he stood abruptly, walking to the windows. The city spread out below, and for the first time, he could see its lights, not clearly, but as countless points of brightness in the darkness. The empire he'd built without ever seeing it, now threatening to slip away because he could finally glimpse its edges. Mr. Grayson? Lila's voice was gentle. Is everything all right? He turned toward her, his face tight with emotion. The board thinks I'm losing my mind. They might try to take my company. Because you can see light? Hope asked, confusion clear in her voice. Because they think I'm hallucinating, he explained. In their world, blind men don't suddenly start seeing. But you did, Hope said simply. God made it happen. Jace closed his eyes, feeling the city lights blur through his fragile new vision. Everything he'd built, everything he'd achieved might now be at risk because of this miracle he hadn't asked for and couldn't explain. Lila stepped closer, her presence warm and steady. What will you do? What I've always done, he said, opening his eyes to the glowing city before him. Fight for what's mine. But his voice held a new uncertainty, as if he wasn't quite sure anymore what that meant. Dawn crept into Jace's penthouse, painting the darkness with whispers of light he'd never known before. He stood in his bedroom, watching the sun rise, or rather sensing its growing presence as a brightening pressure against his eyes. His hands trembled as he touched the window, feeling its familiar coolness while simultaneously seeing, for the first time, the faint glow that passed through it. Amazing, he whispered to himself, pressing his forehead against the glass. The sound of quiet footsteps made him turn. Good morning, Mr. Grayson. Lila's voice came from the doorway. Would you like your breakfast now? Actually, he said, his voice uncertain. Would you help me see my home? Really see it? There was a pause, then Lila's warm reply. Of course. They started in his bedroom. Jace walked slowly, touching familiar objects while trying to match the shadows and shapes his eyes now perceived with the mental map he'd built over years of blindness. Your dresser is dark mahogany, Lila explained as his fingers traced the wooden surface. It's a deep, rich brown, like coffee or the earth after rain. Brown, Jace repeated, trying to connect the sensation under his fingers with the dim shapes he could make out. And the walls? Cream-colored, soft and warm, like fresh bread. They moved through each room, Lila patiently describing colors and shapes, while Jace attempted to merge his lifetime of tactile understanding with these new, ghostly visual impressions. In his office, he paused before his piano, its massive shape a darker shadow against the wall. I can actually see it, he said, wonder in his voice. Just the outline, but it's there. Light suddenly flooded the room as Hope bounded in, her arms full of flowers. Good morning, Mr. Grayson. Look what I picked from the terrace garden. She approached carefully, holding out her bouquet. "This one's yellow. It feels happy, doesn't it? Like sunshine you can touch." Jace reached out, his fingers brushing the delicate petals. The simple joy in Hope's voice, her earnest desire to share beauty with him, struck something deep in his heart. His throat tightened as he tried to respond. "Yes," he managed finally. "It does feel happy." The morning passed too quickly, and soon Jace had to prepare for work. The board meeting loomed ahead, but he felt stronger after the morning's explorations. However, that strength began to waver the moment he entered the conference room. The whispers started immediately. He could hear them clearly with his heightened hearing, murmurs about mental stability and stress-induced hallucinations. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs as he took his seat. "Mr. Grayson," Gerald Matthews, the head of the board, began carefully. "We've called this meeting to discuss some concerns about my suddenly developing light perception," Jace said flatly. "About the impact of these claims on company stability," Matthews corrected. "The markets are nervous, Jace. Your condition has been a known factor in your leadership. It's part of your story. But this sudden change, these reports of miracle cures—" "Medical facts aren't miracles," Jace interrupted, though doubt gnawed at him. How could he explain what had happened without sounding unstable? "We're suggesting a temporary leave," another board member added gently. "Just until things settle down. For your own good, Jace." The words struck like physical blows. These people, many of whom he'd known for years, were treating him like a liability. The very quality that made him special, that had driven him to build this empire, was now being used against him. Fury rose in his chest, tangling with hurt. Without waiting for further discussion, he stood. "I'll consider your suggestion," he said coldly, though they all knew he wouldn't. "Now, if you'll excuse me." He left the building, dismissing his driver. The city hummed around him as he walked, its familiar sounds now accompanied by faint glimmers of light. Street lamps, store windows, car headlights. Each new visual sensation was both wonderful and disorienting, like learning a foreign language while trying to conduct business in it. When he reached his building, the doorman's concerned greeting told him he looked as shaken as he felt. The elevator ride up was a blur of emotions, anger, fear, confusion, and underneath it all, a strange sort of joy at seeing even the elevator's dim lighting. As he approached his door, he heard voices from inside, Lila and Hope, reading together. He paused, hand on, the doorknob, listening. "And Jesus said unto him, Receive thy sight, thy faith hath saved thee." Lila's voice carried clearly through the door. And immediately he received his sight, and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise unto God. "Just like Mr. Grayson," Hope's excited voice chimed in. Jace stood frozen, tears gathering in his newly light-sensitive eyes. The parallel was too strong to ignore, a blind man receiving sight through faith. But his faith had been in control, in technology, in his own abilities. Until Lila and Hope arrived, he'd never considered any other kind. He wiped his eyes before entering, but Lila saw his expression immediately. "Mr. Grayson, are you all right?" "The board meeting," he began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the day's events. Hope came to his side, taking his hand. "Did they not believe you could see the light?" Jace squeezed her small hand gently. "No, they didn't. But maybe that's not what matters most right now." The tears came again, and this time he didn't try to hide them. In the soft afternoon light filtering through his windows, surrounded by the presence of these two people who had somehow broken through his walls, Jace Grayson let himself cry for the first time in decades. They sat with him in silence, Hope still holding his hand, Lila's quiet presence nearby. while the Bible lay open on the table, its ancient words about faith and healing seeming to hang in the air around them. The days that followed blurred together in a kaleidoscope of new sensations for Jace. Each morning brought fresh challenges as his partial vision struggled to make sense of the world around him. Simple tasks he'd mastered through touch and sound now became puzzling adventures in light and shadow. In his kitchen, reaching for his morning coffee, Jace's hand knocked the cup over. Frustration burned in his chest as coffee spread across the counter. "It's okay." Lila's gentle voice came from nearby. "The depth is different when you try to use both sight and touch. Let's practice together." She guided him through the motions, her hand steady as she helped him pour water into a fresh cup. "Feel the weight of the pitcher," she instructed. "Now watch the light reflect off the water as it moves. Listen to the sound. Let all your senses work together." Jace concentrated, his brow furrowed. The water caught the morning light, creating patterns he'd never imagined. Slowly, carefully, he managed to fill the cup without spilling. "Well done." Lila smiled, her voice warm with encouragement. Later that afternoon, she brought him a basket of laundry. "Folding helps with spatial awareness," she explained. "And the different colors can help you practice distinguishing light levels." They sat together in the living room, Lila demonstrating how to match corners and create neat squares. Jace's fingers, so precise with Braille, fumbled with the unfamiliar visual guidance. But Lila remained, patient, showing him again and again until his movements became more confident. Hope bounced into the room during their folding session, her energy brightening the space. "Can I help?" she asked eagerly. "I know a fun way to learn colors." Lila nodded, and Hope sat cross-legged on the floor, pulling out different colored towels. "See this one?" She held up a blue towel. "It's like that soft music you play in the evening, calm and peaceful. And this red one..." She grabbed another. "It's like drums, bold and strong." Jace tilted his head, intrigued by her unique perspective. "What about this one?" he asked, touching a pale yellow pillowcase. "That's like the high notes on your piano." Hope replied enthusiastically. "Light and happy like sunshine." Something bubbled up from deep inside Jace, a sound he hadn't made in years. He was laughing, really laughing, the joy of it surprising him as much as his new vision. Hope giggled along with him, and even Lila joined in, the sound of their shared laughter filling the usually quiet apartment. As evening approached, Lila prepared dinner while Hope did her homework. Jace sat in his favorite chair, resting his eyes from the day's efforts. The smell of cooking and the soft sounds of domestic life surrounded him. "Would you like to hear a story?" Lila asked as she worked, her voice carrying from the kitchen. "About the church where I grew up?" "Yes," Jace found himself saying, curious about this woman who had brought such change to his life. "It was a small church," she began, "but full of love. When my husband passed away, leaving me alone with Hope, that community carried us through. They brought food, helped with childcare, but most importantly, they reminded me that faith can light the darkest paths." She paused, stirring something on the stove. "Even when I had to take cleaning jobs in houses where people looked down on me, my faith kept me standing tall. It wasn't about pride, it was about knowing my worth in God's eyes." Jace absorbed her words, feeling their weight. "I used to believe," he said quietly. "When my mother was alive, she took me to church every Sunday. But the day she died, I stopped. How could I believe in a God who would take away both my sight and my mother?" The kitchen fell silent except for the soft bubbling of whatever was cooking. Finally, Lila spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes the hardest part of faith is accepting that we can't understand everything. But look at you now, seeing light for the first time. Isn't that a kind of miracle?" That night, as Jace lay in bed, his mind swirled with the day's experiences. The world of light and shadow was still overwhelming, but something was shifting inside him. As he drifted off to sleep, the colors Hope had described melted into his dreams, blues flowing like quiet music, reds pulsing like drum beats, yellows twinkling like high piano notes. In his dreams, light and music danced together, creating a symphony he could finally see. The darkness that had been his constant companion for 52 years was transforming, becoming a canvas for possibilities he'd never dared to imagine. Each new glimmer of light brought both challenge and wonder, reminding him of how much he still had to learn. In his dreams, his mother's face appeared, not as a memory of touch, but as a soft glow of love and warmth. The image blended with Lila's hymns and Hope's laughter, creating a tapestry of sound and light that followed him through the night. The late summer breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers through Jace's penthouse as he stood by the window, marveling at how his world had changed. 3 weeks had passed since those first glimpses of light, and now he could make out distinct shapes and colors without relying on his cane. The city skyline spread before him like a painting coming slowly into focus, a view he'd built but never seen. His assistant, Marcus, stood nearby reviewing plans for the upcoming charity gala. The grand ballroom at the Riverside Hotel is confirmed for Saturday evening, he reported. We're expecting 400 guests. Jace nodded, his mind already picturing the event. And the foundation paperwork? All set. The Hope Thompson Medical Research Foundation will be officially announced at the gala. The initial funding of $50 million has been allocated. The sound of small feet padding across the floor made Jace smile. Hope emerged from the hallway, carrying a stack of books. "Mr. Grayson," she called out, "look what I found in the library. Books about eyes and how they work." He turned toward her voice, still amazed that he could now see her outline, a small figure full of energy and light. "Those might come in handy for the foundation," he said warmly. "Would you like to help explain the science to our guests?" Hope's eyes widened. "Really, I can help." "Of course. This foundation exists because of you, after all." Lila appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hope, sweetheart, Mr. Grayson is busy with work." "Actually," Jace interrupted, "I'd like to speak with you both." He gestured to the sofa. "Please sit." Lila hesitated before joining her daughter. Jace could now see enough to notice her uncertainty, the way she smoothed her skirt nervously. "The gala this weekend," he began. "It's more than just a charity event. I want to share what happened here. The miracle that began with your song, Lila. Your faith." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "People need to hear this story. It could help so many others." Lila's voice was soft but concerned. "Mr. Grayson, we're simple people. All this attention, please," he said gently. "Call me Jace, and I understand your hesitation, but this isn't about publicity, it's about purpose, about giving meaning to what happened here." Hope grabbed her mother's hand. "Mom, we could help other people see, like in the Bible stories you read me." Lila's expression softened. "You really believe this could make a difference?" "I do," Jace answered. "The foundation will fund research into vision restoration, support families dealing with vision loss, and provide resources for children like Hope who want to learn Braille to help others." He moved closer, his newly gained sight allowing him to meet her eyes. "None of this would have happened without you both. Will you let me honor that?" After a long moment, Lila nodded. "For the greater good," she said quietly. "Yes." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Designers arrived with evening wear for Lila and Hope. Jace insisted on the finest, a midnight blue gown for Lila that made her look like starlight, and a yellow dress for Hope that matched her sunny personality. The night of the gala arrived clear and cool. The Riverside Hotel's grand ballroom sparkled with thousands of tiny lights. Jace stood at the entrance, greeting guests, his heart full as he watched the blur of colors and movement through his improving vision. Each face was still a soft focus image, but he could see enough to recognize expressions, to catch the wonder in people's eyes when they realized he could see them too. Lila and Hope arrived fashionably late, as planned. A hush fell over the crowd as they entered. Hope bounced excitedly, while Lila moved with quiet grace, though Jace could sense her nervousness. "You both look beautiful," he said softly, offering his arm to Lila. "Ready?" She took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The evening progressed like a dream. Dinner was served as string musicians played softly in the background. Hope charmed everyone at their table, explaining with surprising clarity how she'd learned Braille to write notes to Jace. Lila sat tall and dignified, her natural warmth drawing people in despite her initial reservations. Finally, it was time for Jace's speech. He stood at the podium, looking out over the sea of faces that were no longer hidden in darkness. His voice was strong and clear as he began. 3 months ago, I lived in a world without light. I had built an empire, but I couldn't see it. I had everything money could buy, but I was blind to what truly mattered." He paused, his emotion visible. "Then God sent me 2 angels disguised as a housekeeper and her daughter." He went on to describe that stormy night, how Lila's hymn had awakened something long dormant in his soul. "She sang my mother's lullaby, and light came back into my world. Not just physical light, though that miracle still amazes my doctors, but the light of faith, of love, of purpose." Tears glistened in many eyes as he announced the foundation. "Tonight, we launch the Hope Thompson Medical Research Foundation, named for a little girl who taught a blind man to see with his heart. Through this foundation, we will fund cutting-edge vision research, support families affected by vision loss, and spread hope to those who think miracles are impossible." The crowd rose in a standing ovation as Jace invited Lila and Hope to join him on stage. Hope waved excitedly while Lila stood gracefully, tears streaming down her face as the applause washed over them. Later, as the evening wound down, Jace found himself on the hotel's balcony. The city spread out before him like a blanket of stars, each light a beacon in the darkness. He could see them now, really see them, and the beauty overwhelmed him. The sound of the door opening made him turn. Lila stepped out, her blue dress shimmering in the nighttime air. "Thank you," she said simply, joining him at the railing. "I should be thanking you," he replied. "You changed everything." She shook her head. "God changed everything. I was just an instrument." Jace looked up at the night sky, where stars twinkled faintly through his newfound vision. For the first time in 40 years, he felt the presence of something greater than himself. His lips moved in a whisper, forming words he hadn't spoken since childhood. "Thank you," he prayed softly, "for helping me see, not just the world around me, but love itself." His voice caught. "Thank you for sending them to me." The city lights blurred as tears filled his eyes, but he didn't mind. He had learned that sometimes the clearest vision comes through tears of gratitude. The night air carried the distant sound of music from the ballroom, blending with the quiet beauty of the moment, a symphony of sight and sound that touched his soul. The morning after the gala dawned bright and crisp. Sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows as Lila prepared breakfast, humming softly while Hope set the table. Everything felt different after last night's celebration. Lighter, somehow, filled with possibility. Jace entered the dining room, his steps confident now that he could see shapes and shadows. He smiled at the blur of yellow that was Hope's dress as she bounced over to pull out his chair. "Good morning, Mr. Bright," she chirped, using her special nickname for him. "Good morning, Hope," he replied, settling into his seat. The aroma of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air as Lila brought over his usual breakfast plate. Then it happened. Mid-reach for his coffee cup, Jace's hand froze. His face contorted in sudden pain, and he clutched his head with both hands, a low groan escaping his lips. "Mr. Grayson?" Lila's voice sharpened with concern. "I can't. It's going dark," he gasped. "The light, it's fading." The coffee cup clattered to the floor as Jace doubled over, his breathing harsh and irregular. Hope stood frozen, her small hands gripping the back of a chair. "Mom!" Her voice trembled. Lila was already in motion, her phone in hand. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No," Jace managed, though his face was pale with pain. "My driver. Downstairs. Please, help me up." Lila wrapped her arm around his waist, supporting him as he stood unsteadily. "Hope, grab his coat. We're taking him to the hospital, ourselves." The elevator ride down was tense and silent, broken only by Jace's labored breathing. In the car, he leaned back against the leather seat, eyes squeezed shut, while Lila held his hand. Hope sat quietly beside her mother, her usual chatter replaced by worried glances. At St. Mary's Hospital, doctors rushed Jace into examination. Hours passed in the waiting room as Lila paced and Hope dozed fitfully in an uncomfortable chair. Finally, Dr. Chen emerged, his face grave. "Mr. Grayson is stable," he began, "but I'm afraid I have concerning news. The improvement in his vision appears to have been temporary. We're seeing rapid degradation of the light perception he gained." Lila's hand flew to her mouth. "But why? How?" The doctor shook his head. "We don't fully understand it. The human brain is complex, and vision even more so. Sometimes temporary improvements can occur, but they're often unstable. We'll monitor him closely, but—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You should prepare for the possibility that he may return to his previous condition." Over the next few days, they watched helplessly as darkness crept back into Jace's world. The shapes and shadows he'd grown accustomed to began to blur and fade, like watercolors running in the rain. He tried to hide his despair, but Lila could hear it in his voice, see it in the way his hands trembled when he reached for things he could no longer make out. Then came the email. Lila was cleaning the kitchen when Jace's assistant rushed in, tablet in hand. "Ms. Thompson, we have a situation." The anonymous message to the board was brutal in its accusations. Claims that Lila had manipulated Jace's vulnerability, that the miracle story was orchestrated to gain access to his fortune, that the charity foundation was an elaborate scheme. Before they could contain it, the story leaked to the media. Headlines screamed across newspapers and websites. "Blind billionaire's faith hoax exposed." "Con woman uses religion to dupe tech mogul." "Miracle or manipulation." Paparazzi swarmed the building entrance like angry bees. Camera flashes exploded whenever anyone entered or left. Reporters shouted questions. "Ms. Thompson, did you fake the miracle?" "Mr. Grayson, were you deceived? Was it all for publicity?" Lila tried to shield Hope from the worst of it, but the girl's bright spirit dimmed as she heard the cruel whispers, saw the pointing fingers. The final straw came when Hope came home crying because classmates had shown her the tabloid headlines on their phones. That evening, Lila sat at her small desk in the servants' quarters, hands steady as she wrote her resignation letter. Tears splashed onto the paper, but her resolve didn't waver. She knew what she had to do. She found Jace in his study, sitting at his piano but not playing, lost in the darkness that had reclaimed him. "I can't let you do this," he said before she could speak, having heard her familiar footsteps. "Mr. Grayson, Jace," she said softly. "Sometimes faith asks us to step back, to trust in a bigger plan than our own." "This isn't right," he protested, standing up. "You didn't do anything wrong. The miracle was real. I saw light. I saw colors." "I know," she soothed, "and that truth lives in our hearts. But right now, staying here only feeds their cruel story. It hurts, Hope. It hurts your company. Sometimes the strongest faith is shown in letting go." "Please," he whispered, and the break in his voice nearly shattered her resolve. "Don't leave me in the dark again." Lila touched his hand gently. "You're not in the dark. You have light inside you now, the light of faith. No one can take that away." Hope came in then, her small footsteps hesitant. She wrapped her arms around Jace's waist in a tight hug. "We'll still pray for you, Mr. Bright," she whispered against his suit jacket. "Every single day." Jace knelt down to her level, his hands finding her shoulders. "Thank you for teaching me to see with my heart, Hope." They left quietly, their few belongings packed in 2 small suitcases. The elevator descended smoothly, taking them away from the life they'd briefly shared. Outside, the reporters had finally gone home, leaving the street peaceful in the gathering dusk. Jace stood at his window, though he could no longer see the city lights. The penthouse felt vast and empty, the silence no longer peaceful but oppressive. His fingers traced one of Hope's Braille notes, her last one, left on his desk. "God's love shines in the dark." The quiet pressed in around him like a physical weight. No more hymns floating through the halls, no more childish giggles or running footsteps, no more soft conversations over evening tea. The darkness seemed deeper now, having known the light. He stood there until night fell completely, remembering the brief miracle of sight, the even greater miracle of love and faith he'd found. The memory of Lila's hymn echoed in his mind, a melody that had once brought light into his darkness. But now there was only silence, and the weight of things left unsaid. The darkness crept back like an old friend, unwanted yet familiar. Day by day, Jace's fragile gift of sight slipped away until even the brightest lights became nothing more than whispers in the void. The doctors called it a regression to baseline, as if reducing miracle to medical terms could soften the blow. Jace stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, remembering how the city lights had sparkled during those precious weeks. Now his world was black again, but somehow darker than before, because now he knew what he was missing. His phone buzzed, another message from the board. They'd been patient with his situation, they said, but the company needed stability. Tomorrow's vote was just a formality. They would temporarily remove him as CEO for health reasons, allowing him time to process recent events. Recent events, as if his whole life hadn't transformed and shattered in the span of a few months. His assistant's resignation letter lay on his desk, printed in crisp black ink he could no longer read. She'd lasted 2 weeks after Lila left, but the constant media circus and board pressure had worn her down. "I'm sorry, Mr. Grayson," she'd said, voice thick with guilt. "I just can't handle the chaos anymore." Chaos. That's what his ordered world had become. The penthouse felt cavernous now, each room echoing with absence. No more of Lila's quiet humming as she worked. No more of Hope's footsteps pattering down hallways. No more warmth. No more light. His fingers traced the wall as he wandered through dark corridors, though he knew every inch by heart. The house seemed to mock him with memories. Here was where Hope had first described yellow to him. Like sunshine feels on your face. There was where Lila had taught him to distinguish colors by touch, her hands gentle as she guided his fingers over different textures. The piano sat untouched, sheet music gathering dust. He hadn't played since that final night, when the last notes had faded into silence along with his sight. Music felt like betrayal now. It had been the bridge between his world and Lila's, and without her. He slumped onto the piano bench, head bowed. His fingers brushed the keys but didn't press them. The smooth ivory reminded him of tears. Something crinkled under his hand. Frowning, Jace reached behind the sheet music stand. His fingers found paper, folded small and tucked away. As he opened it, his heart stumbled. He knew that texture. Braille dots, pressed with careful precision by small fingers. Hope's last note, hidden away like a time capsule of joy. His fingers trembled as they moved across the words. You don't need eyes to see love. It's already in you. The sob caught him by surprise, tearing from his throat like something wild and wounded. All his careful control shattered. He wept, for lost sight, for empty rooms, for a child's wisdom he'd been too blind to see. Hours passed as he sat there, Hope's note cradled in his hands. As his tears dried, something shifted inside him. The darkness remained, but it felt different now. Less like an ending, more like a canvas waiting to be filled. He'd been given something far more precious than physical sight. Lila and Hope had shown him faith, not just in God, but in love itself, in the power of kindness, in the strength of gentle hearts. The media had tried to twist their story into scandal. The board had used it as an excuse to push him aside, but they'd all missed the real miracle. It wasn't about seeing light, it was about finally seeing truth. Dawn crept over the city, warming his face through the windows. Jace stood, Hope's note tucked safely in his pocket. His hand found his phone, fingers dialing from memory. Harrison. It's Jace Grayson. I need you to prepare some papers. Yes, I know what time it is. He paused, a slight smile touching his lips. We're going to fight, back, but not how they expect. The lawyer started outlining aggressive legal strategies, but Jace cut him off. No lawsuits, no revenge. I want to do something bigger. His fingers brushed Hope's note through his pocket. Something with purpose. As he outlined his plan, the morning light grew stronger. He couldn't see it anymore, but he could feel its warmth. Sometimes he realized you had to lose your sight to truly learn how to see. The battle ahead would be hard. The board wouldn't give up easily. The media would twist everything. But for the first time since the darkness returned, Jace felt steady, strong. He had lost his company's trust, his reputation, his brief miracle of sight. But he had found something greater, faith in the unseen, hope in the darkness, and love that needed no light to grow. The phone call ended. Jace stood in his silent apartment, feeling the sun on his face. The battle for redemption was beginning. But this time, he wasn't fighting for control or power. He was fighting for something far more precious. The light that Hope and Lila had shown him existed in his own heart. His fingers found the piano keys again. Perhaps it was time to let music back in. After all, some things, like faith, like love, didn't need eyes to be seen. They just needed an open heart to be felt. The mahogany conference table stretched before Jace like a battlefield. He sat straight-backed in his chair, fingers lightly touching its polished surface, as his legal team settled around him. The familiar sense of coffee and leather briefcases filled the air. Mr. Grayson. Harrison Webster, his head counsel, began. We've reviewed all possible angles. The board's decision to remove you was technically within their rights, but there are vulnerabilities we can exploit. Jace lifted his hand, silencing the legal chatter. I'm not interested in a hostile takeover, Harrison. That's not why I called you here. Papers shuffled as the lawyers exchanged glances. Jace could hear their confusion in the subtle shifts of fabric, the slight catches in breath. "I want to transform Grayson Innovations," he continued. "Our outreach department has always been window dressing, corporate social responsibility to make shareholders happy. I want to convert it into a full humanitarian foundation." "Sir," Harrison's voice held careful neutrality. The board works for the shareholders." Jace interrupted. "And I still own 42% of company shares. Present them with this." He slid a folder across the table. "A complete proposal for the Grayson Foundation for Medical Aid and Accessibility Technologies." As Harrison read through the document, Jace explained his vision. "We'll develop cutting-edge assistive devices, fund research into degenerative conditions, provide grants for medical care, make technology serve humanity, not just profits." "This is ambitious," Harrison said slowly. "The investment required will come from my personal fortune." Jace finished. "I'm prepared to commit $2 billion as initial funding." The room fell silent. Jace could feel their stares, could practically hear their minds recalculating everything they thought they knew about him. "Draft the proposals," he instructed. "I want everything ready for the emergency board meeting tomorrow." The next morning, Jace stood before the board of directors, his cane held loosely at his side. The familiar boardroom buzzed with tense whispers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily through the space. "You've questioned my fitness to lead. You've used my temporary recovery and subsequent relapse as evidence of instability." He smiled slightly. "You're right, I have changed, but not in the way you think." For the next hour, he outlined his vision for the foundation. Every question about costs, he answered with precise figures. Every doubt about feasibility, he countered with detailed research. Every snide remark about his religious experience, he met with calm professionalism. "This is absurd," Gerald Matthews, his chief rival on the board, finally exploded. "You want to turn our profit center into a charity case, all because some maid sang you a hymn?" The room tensed, waiting for Jace's infamous temper. Instead, he laughed softly. "No, Gerald, because for the first time in my life I truly see what we could become. Not just another tech company chasing quarterly profits, but a force for real change." The mockery in their voices couldn't touch him now. He had faced true darkness and found light within it. Their sneers seemed small in comparison. As evening fell, Jace's driver pulled up to a small brick building on the edge of downtown. The simple wooden sign read, "Grace Community Church." Wind chimes tinkled gently in the breeze. Jace's cane tapped against worn stone steps as he made his way to the entrance. The door creaked open, and the scent of old wood and candle wax wrapped around him. "Can I help you?" a gentle voice asked. Male, older, with warmth in its tone. "I'm looking for Lila Thompson," Jace said. "She mentioned this church once." "Ah, Lila." The man's voice softened with recognition. "I'm Pastor Samuel Brooks. Lila and Hope are dear members of our congregation, though we haven't seen them lately." Jace nodded, throat tight. "She worked for me, briefly. I'd like to make things right." "Why don't you join us for evening service?" Pastor Samuel suggested. "We're about to begin." Before Jace could refuse, organ music filled the space. The sound drew him in like an embrace. He found himself being guided to a pew, the wood smooth and worn beneath his hands. The congregation filtered in around him. No designer perfumes or rustling silk here, just the honest scents of soap and cotton, of people who worked hard and prayed harder. They greeted each other warmly, and several welcomed him without a hint of recognition. The service began with a hymn. The voices rose around him, untrained but sincere. No professional choir could match the pure faith in these voices. They sang of grace, of light in darkness, of love that never failed. Jace sat still, letting the music wash over him. Here, in this humble church, he felt the presence of something greater than himself. The same peace he had glimpsed in Lila's quiet strength, in Hope's innocent wisdom. His fingers found the small braille note in his pocket, Hope's last gift. You don't need eyes to see love. It's already in you. Tears slid down his cheeks, but he didn't wipe them away. In the darkness behind his eyes, light bloomed like dawn. Not the fleeting physical sight he had briefly known, but something deeper, something permanent. The hymns continued, filling the small church with joy. Jace might have lost his physical vision, but here, surrounded by the faith he once scorned, he could finally see clearly. The light hadn't left him when his sight failed. It had simply moved from his eyes to his heart. Pastor Samuel's hand touched his shoulder gently. "Welcome home, son," he whispered. And for the first time since darkness returned, Jace felt truly, completely whole. The congregation's voices rose in another hymn, and Jace found himself joining in. The words were unfamiliar, but the feeling behind them, love, hope, faith, those he now understood perfectly. Though his eyes remained sightless, his soul was filled with light. The autumn wind rustled through the city streets as Jace's car pulled up to St. Martha's Community Center. His driver opened the door, and the familiar tap of his cane echoed against concrete. 7 days of searching had taught him more about his city than 25 years of running it. "Good morning, Mr. Grayson." A tired voice greeted him. "I'm Linda Martinez, the center director." "Please call me Jace." He smiled in the direction of her voice. "I'm looking for someone, Lila Thompson and her daughter Hope. They might have volunteered here." Linda's voice softened. "The Thompsons? They used to help with our after-school program, but I haven't seen them lately. Such wonderful people. Lila could make anyone feel special." Jace's heart tightened. Another dead end. But he wasn't giving up. "Would you tell me about your center?" he asked, genuinely curious. For the next hour, Linda showed him around. The building needed repairs. He could hear water dripping, feel the draft from poorly sealed windows. Children's voices echoed from a classroom where volunteers taught basic computer skills on ancient machines. "Those computers?" Linda sighed. "They're from your company's donation program 10 years ago. We're grateful, but they can barely run modern educational software." Jace stopped walking. 10 years. Why hasn't the program been updated? Budget cuts. Linda's voice held no accusation, just resignation. Your board redirected funds to research and development. The weight of that decision, his decision, settled on his shoulders. How many other communities had his pursuit of profit hurt? "I'd like to make this right," he said quietly. "What do you need?" By afternoon, his foundation had ordered 30 new computers and arranged for building repairs. But more importantly, Jace sat with the families who came to St. Martha's, listening to their stories. A former factory worker described losing his job to automation, then finding hope through the center's retraining program. A single mother spoke of struggling after budget cuts eliminated her teaching position. Each story pierced him deeper. "I'm sorry," he told them, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "I was blind in more ways than one." The next few days followed a similar pattern. He visited shelters, schools, and small clinics. At each stop, he asked about the Thompsons while opening his heart and his wallet to help where needed. On the 6th day, his driver pulled up to Hope Memorial Clinic, a small medical facility in one of the city's poorest neighborhoods. As he stepped inside, something familiar tickled his senses. A melody floating down the hallway. The hymn, his mother's lullaby, Lila's song. His heart stopped, then raced. Following the sound, he moved carefully through the corridor, his cane forgotten in his urgency. The voice grew stronger, wrapping around him like sunshine. He reached a doorway and stood still, listening. Lila was singing to someone, her voice gentle and pure as ever. He could hear other sounds too, medical equipment beeping softly, papers rustling, and "Mr. Bright!" Hope's excited cry cut through everything else. Small feet pattered across linoleum, and then warm arms wrapped around his waist. He dropped to his knees, hugging her tightly as tears spilled down his cheeks. "Hope," he whispered, voice breaking. "Sweet Hope." "Mama, look, it's Mr. Bright. He found us." He heard Lila's sharp intake of breath, then soft footsteps approaching. The scent of lavender, her perfume, surrounded him. "Jace." Her voice trembled. "What are you doing here?" He stood slowly, one hand still on Hope's shoulder. "Looking for you. Both of you. I've been searching all week." "But why?" The hurt in her voice cut deep. "After everything that happened." "Because I was wrong." The words came easily now. "Because you gave me something more precious than sight. You helped me see with my heart." He heard her sniffle, felt her hand touch his arm hesitantly. "The media was cruel to you. The board, none of that matters." He squeezed Hope's shoulder gently. "What matters is what I learned from you both. About faith, about love, about seeing the light that never fades. You can still see it." Hope asked eagerly. "Even though your eyes went dark again?" Jace knelt down to her level, smiling through his tears. "More clearly than ever, sweetheart. It's right here." He touched his chest. "Where it always was. I just needed help finding it." Lila's hand found his, warm and strong. "We've been praying for you," she said softly. "I know." He stood, keeping hold of her hand. "I felt it. Even in my darkest moments, I felt it." He turned toward her voice. "Come home? Both of you? Not as employees, never that again? As family?" Hope squealed with delight, but Lila hesitated. "Jace, are you sure? Your reputation, your company, are being transformed just like me." He explained about the foundation, the community work, the changes he was making. "And I need your help, both of you, to keep me seeing clearly." A long moment passed. Then Lila's other hand came up to cup his cheek, thumb brushing away his tears. "You really have changed," she whispered. "Because of you," he said simply. "You helped me see the light that never fades." Hope hugged them both, creating a circle of warmth in the small clinic hallway. "See, Mama, I told you God would make everything okay." Lila laughed softly, the sound mixing with her tears. "Yes, baby. Yes, you did." They stood there together, bathed in afternoon sunlight streaming through a nearby window. Jace couldn't see it with his eyes, but he felt its warmth on his face. Just as he felt the warmth of love and faith in his heart. A different kind of light, but just as real. More real, perhaps, than anything his temporary vision had shown him. "Tell me about your work here," he said finally, still holding them close. As Lila described the clinic's mission and needs, Jace listened with new ears. This, he realized, was what true sight meant, seeing with the heart, hearing with the soul, touching lives with purpose and love. The light that never faded wasn't in his eyes at all. It lived in moments like this, Hope's innocent joy, Lila's faithful strength, and the endless possibilities for doing good in a world that desperately needed it. Monday morning arrived with purpose as Jace Grayson strode through the glass doors of Grayson Innovations headquarters. His cane tapped confidently against the marble floor, each step filled with renewed determination. Lila walked beside him, her presence steady and grounding. "Third floor boardroom?" she asked quietly. Yes, time to clean house. His voice held no anger, only resolve. The elevator ride was silent but charged with anticipation. When they entered the boardroom, Jace could sense the tension. 12 executives shifting nervously in their leather chairs. "Gentlemen," he announced, standing tall. "Today marks a new chapter for Grayson Innovations. Those of you who orchestrated the media attacks, who tried to force me out, you know who you are. Your resignations are expected on my desk within the hour." Protests erupted, but Jace raised his hand. "I have proof of your actions. You can leave with dignity or face legal consequences." 4 chairs scraped back. 4 sets of footsteps hurried out. "The rest of you have a choice." Jace continued. "Join us in transformation or step aside. This company will now serve a higher purpose." Over the next several weeks, Grayson Innovations underwent a remarkable metamorphosis. Lila's touch was evident everywhere, from the new mission statement emphasizing compassion and service to the warm greetings that replaced cold corporate speak. The Grayson Foundation for Accessible Futures took shape under Lila's leadership. She brought her experience from the clinic, combining it with corporate resources to create something extraordinary. The Foundation's first initiative focused on developing cutting-edge medical treatments for children with disabilities. Hope became their first success story. The treatments developed by Grayson's Medical Research Division helped stabilize her condition. Her bright laughter now filled the halls of both home and office as she became the Foundation's unofficial ambassador. "Mr. Bright," she called one afternoon, running into his office. "Another kid got better today. The doctors used your new medicine." Jace smiled, opening his arms for her familiar hug. "That's wonderful news, sweetheart. Tell me all about it." As Hope chatted about the young patient, Jace marveled at how natural this felt now. This warmth, this purpose, this family they'd become. The corporate world had scoffed when he announced the company's new direction, but results spoke louder than critics. Profits remained strong, but now they fueled meaningful change. The Foundation established training programs for visually impaired entrepreneurs, with Jace himself serving as lead mentor. Every Wednesday afternoon, he met with young innovators, teaching them to transform their challenges into strengths. "Your disability isn't your weakness," he told them. "It's your unique perspective. Learn to see with your heart, and you'll notice opportunities others miss." One particularly meaningful project was the development of affordable accessibility technologies. Grayson Innovations released its patents for assistive devices into the public domain, making them available to anyone who needed them. Lila's office became a hub of activity, coordinating outreach programs across the country. She handled everything with grace, from major donor meetings to comforting worried parents. Her faith-inspired leadership style attracted passionate volunteers and dedicated professionals. "You've created something beautiful here," Jace told her one evening as they reviewed program reports in his home office. "We created it together." She corrected gently. "God gave us each what we needed to serve others." The transformation reached beyond the company walls. Other corporations began following their example, realizing that profit and purpose could coexist. Grayson Innovations became known as the company that saw with its heart. Hope's health continued to improve under the Foundation's care. She spent her afternoons after school helping in the children's ward, reading to patients and sharing her story of healing. Her presence brought light to every room she entered. "Mama," she said one day, "remember when you used to clean Mr. Bright's house? Now you help clean people's hearts." Lila laughed, hugging her daughter close. "That's a beautiful way to see it, baby." The company's annual charity gala transformed from a formal affair into a celebration of life and possibility. Children from the Foundation's programs performed music alongside professional musicians. Young entrepreneurs showcased their innovations. The evening always ended with Lila leading everyone in the hymn that had started it all. Jace stood at these events, feeling the energy of joy and hope surrounding him. Though his eyes remained dark, his heart saw everything clearly, the beauty of compassion in action, the power of faith-driven purpose, the light that transformed lives. One morning, as sunshine warmed his face, Jace sat at his desk, running his fingers over a Braille report. The door opened, and Hope's familiar footsteps approached. "Time for your 10 o'clock meeting, Mr. Bright," she announced importantly. "The new kids from the Entrepreneur program are here." "Thank you, my faithful assistant." He smiled. "Will you join us? They could use some inspiration from my favorite ray of sunshine." "Can I tell them about how you learn to see with your heart?" "Of course. That's the most important lesson of all." As they walked to the conference room, Hope's small hand in his, Jace reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The loss of his physical sight had ultimately led him to true vision. Through Lila's faith, Hope's innocence, and his own transformation, he'd discovered that the most important things in life couldn't be seen with eyes alone. The conference room buzzed with nervous energy as young entrepreneurs waited to meet their mentor. Lila was already there, her voice warm as she made introductions. Jace squeezed Hope's hand and stepped forward to begin another day of showing others how to see with their hearts. "Welcome," he said, smiling. "I'm Jace Grayson, and I'm here to help you turn your challenges into your greatest strengths. Let's begin with a story about learning to see the light that never fades." The room fell silent, ready to learn. This was his new purpose, helping others find their way through darkness to light, just as Lila and Hope had done for him. Through them, he'd discovered that true vision came from faith, love, and the courage to see with the heart. Grayson Innovations had become more than a company. It was now a beacon of hope, showing the world that the most powerful light wasn't seen with eyes, but felt with the soul. Every day brought new opportunities to share that light with others, transforming lives one heart at a time. The autumn sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Community Church, casting colourful patterns across the wooden pews. The small church, once struggling to keep its doors open, now buzzed with energy as hundreds of people filled every available seat. Many were beneficiaries of the Grayson Innovations Foundation, families whose lives had been touched by the organization's work over the past year. Jace Grayson sat in the front row, his fingers tracing the raised print of the program. Though he couldn't see the faces around him, he felt their presence, heard their whispered conversations, and sensed their anticipation. The smell of fresh flowers mixed with old wood brought memories of his first visit here, when he'd come searching for Lila and Hope. "It's completely full," Hope whispered beside him, her hand resting on his arm. "Even people standing in the back." Jace smiled, picturing the scene. "Tell me what you see, sweetheart." "The sunlight's making rainbow shadows everywhere," Hope described, her voice animated. "Mama's up front with the choir, wearing her blue dress, the one you said feels like summer sky. And there's Dr. Martinez from the children's ward, and Mr. Johnson from the tech program, and sounds like the whole family's here," Jace said softly, referring to the growing community they'd built together. The piano began to play, and a hush fell over the congregation. Jace recognized Lila's footsteps as she moved to the microphone. Her voice, when it came, was clear and strong, beginning the hymn that had changed everything all those months ago. The melody wrapped around him like a warm embrace, just as it had that stormy night in his penthouse. But this time, instead of sitting alone in darkness, he was surrounded by people who had become more than colleagues or beneficiaries. They had become his family. Hope squeezed his hand as Lila's voice soared through the verses. Other voices joined in, creating a tapestry of harmony that filled every corner of the church. Jace felt tears forming in his eyes, but these were different from the lonely tears he'd shed in his past. These were tears of gratitude, of joy, of belonging. Then something extraordinary happened. Without planning to, Jace found himself standing. His voice, unused to singing in public, joined the chorus. He felt Hope's surprise beside him, heard a slight catch in Lila's voice, but he kept singing. The hymn poured from him like a prayer, carrying all the emotion of his journey, from isolation to connection, from darkness to light, from doubt to faith. One by one, people rose to their feet. The sound swelled, lifting toward the rafters, 100 voices united in celebration of hope and healing. Jace could hear sniffles and soft crying around him, feel the tremor of emotion in the air. As the final notes faded, a profound silence filled the church. Jace remained standing, aware of all the lives touched by the Foundation's work, children who'd received medical care, families supported through hard times, young entrepreneurs given chances they'd never had before. The pastor invited him to speak, and Hope guided him to the podium. His fingers found the edge of the wooden stand, and he took a deep breath, letting his heart guide his words. "A year ago," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed church, "I thought I knew what it meant to be blind. I'd lived without physical sight my entire life, and I'd built what I believed was a successful existence. But I was wrong." He paused, feeling the weight of attention on him. "I was blind twice, once to the world and once to my own soul. I had surrounded myself with wealth and achievement, but I couldn't see what truly mattered. Then God sent me 2 angels disguised as a housekeeper and her daughter." Gentle laughter rippled through the congregation. Jace smiled in Lila and Hope's direction. "Through their faith and love, I experienced a miracle. For a brief time, I was given physical sight. But the real miracle wasn't in those few weeks of seeing. It was in learning to see with my heart. That vision has never faded. Every day, through this Foundation's work, through the courage of everyone in this room, I see the light that never fades." The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous roar. People stood, clapping and cheering, their response echoing off the church walls. Jace heard several amens and hallelujahs rising above the applause. As the sound gradually subsided, he felt a small hand slip into his. Hope's familiar presence steadied him as she led him back to their seat. "See, Mr. Bright," she whispered, using the nickname she'd given him so long ago. "The light's still here." Jace squeezed her hand, feeling warmth spread through his chest. "Yes, it is, Hope. Yes, it is." The service continued with prayers and more hymns, but Jace sat quietly, holding Hope's hand, listening to Lila's voice blend with the choir. The light she spoke of wasn't the kind that required eyes to see. It was the light of faith, of love, of purpose, the kind that illuminated the soul and transformed lives. He thought about how far they'd come from those first awkward days when he'd tried to keep Hope out of his way. Now he couldn't imagine life without her infectious joy or Lila's steady wisdom. Together, they'd built something far more precious than his business empire. They'd built a family, a community, a legacy of light. The morning sunlight continued to paint its rainbow patterns through the stained glass, unseen by Jace's eyes but felt in his heart, a reminder that the most important things in life were never about what you could see, but what you could feel, believe, and share with others. 6 months later, dawn painted the sky in shades Jace Grayson could no longer see. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the Grayson Foundation's new headquarters, his unseeing eyes turned toward the breaking day. The air carried the fresh scent of early morning rain and possibilities, a fitting metaphor for the new chapter unfolding in his life. The 40-story building downtown had been completely renovated, transforming from a cold corporate tower into a warm haven of hope. Each floor now housed different initiatives, medical research facilities, training centers for disabled entrepreneurs, education programs, and community outreach services. The change reflected the foundation's heart and Jace's transformation. His fingers rested lightly on the cool glass as he sensed the city awakening below. Though he couldn't see the sunrise, years of blindness had taught him to read the morning through other senses. The gradual warming of the window pane, the subtle shift in air temperature, the growing sounds of traffic, these told him the story of dawn as clearly as any sight could. Soft footsteps approached. Footsteps he'd grown to know as well as his own heartbeat. Lila Thompson moved with quiet grace, the gentle rustle of her dress, and the faint scent of lavender announcing her presence. She placed a cup of coffee beside him, the ceramic making a soft clink against the wooden windowsill. "Good morning," she said warmly. "Hope wanted me to tell you she got an A on her science project about light refraction." Jace smiled, remembering how the young girl had interviewed him for hours about his brief experience with sight. "She's becoming quite the scientist. We'll have to create a special research division just for her. At this rate, she'll probably run the whole foundation one day." Lila laughed, then grew thoughtful. "It's amazing how much has changed in 6 months." Indeed, change had swept through their lives like a cleansing wind. The foundation had already helped thousands of families access medical care they couldn't otherwise afford. Young entrepreneurs with disabilities were launching successful startups with grace and mentorship. Community programs were bringing hope to neighborhoods that had long been forgotten. "The board meeting yesterday?" Jace began, turning slightly toward Lila's voice. "They approved the expansion of the children's hospital wing. Construction starts next month." "That's wonderful news!" Lila's joy was evident in her voice. "Those families have been praying for this." "Prayer seems to work around here," Jace said softly, thinking of his own journey. "Speaking of which, how are the music therapy programs going?" "Better than we hoped. That hymn." Lila paused, both of them remembering the song that had sparked his miracle. "It's become something of an anthem in the recovery wards. The patients say it gives them strength." The morning light continued to fill the room, and though Jace couldn't see it, he felt its warmth on his face. "I can't see it," he said, gesturing toward the sunrise, "but I can feel it. That's enough." Lila's hand found his shoulder, a gesture of understanding that had become natural between them. "That's what faith is," she replied simply. They stood in comfortable silence, sharing the moment as the city came alive below. The Foundation's day would soon begin. Meetings to attend, lives to touch, hope to share. But for now, this quiet dawn held its own kind of grace. "Do you ever miss it?" Lila asked gently. "The sight you had?" Jace considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But what I gained instead, this new way of seeing the world, of understanding what really matters, that's worth more than any physical sight could offer." He moved away from the window, his steps confident in the space he knew so well. His hand found the piano that had been installed in his office, a symbol of both his past and his future. Sitting at the bench, his fingers found the keys with practiced ease. The first notes of the hymn filled the room, each chord carrying memories of that stormy night when everything changed. The melody flowed from his hands naturally now, no longer just his mother's lullaby or a reminder of loss, but a song of redemption and hope. Layla hummed softly along, her voice harmonizing with the piano as it had that first night. The music swelled to fill the space, floating out through the open office door and down the hallways where early arriving staff paused to listen. The sun continued its ascent over the city, bathing the room in golden light that Jace could feel on his skin. Though his world remained dark, it was filled with a different kind of light now, the light of purpose, of faith, of love. His fingers moved steadily over the keys, playing the song that had changed his life, surrounded by the warmth of a new day and the presence of those who had helped him truly see. The hymn's final notes lingered in the air, mixing with the morning light and the promise of new beginnings. In this moment, blind yet seeing more clearly than ever before, Jace Grayson was exactly where he needed to be, surrounded by the light he no longer needed eyes to see. This was his true miracle, not the brief gift of physical sight, but the eternal light of faith that now guided his every step. As the last echo of music faded, the day began in earnest, ready to unfold with all its possibilities for change, for growth, and for continuing the work of bringing light to others' darkness. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.